right. Hello, everyone. Apologies for the laughter. We're having way too much fun on stage here already. Welcome to another exciting session of TMF Week 2025. So I'm just going to get right into it. But first of all, can you guys hear me? Can you see? Hello from the other side to you too, Kim. Can you guys hear us? Can you see us? I just want to make sure before I start going into the spiel. All right, perfect. I see everyone here. So, as you guys all know, all the sessions are going to be recorded and available at the end of the conference. All attendees are going to receive a certificate at the end of TMF week. So please, 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 we get many messages after every session saying, where's my certificate? It will be at the end of the week. I promise you, we will send those out. We're going to be doing a Q&A session at the end, the last 15 minutes of today's session. So you can see that on the right side. There's a little QA tab. If you want to follow along also with the slides, you can download those in the Docs tab located on your right side of your screen as well. So we're going to be doing a network break like usual at the end of this session. The system will pop up saying, to move in there. And so you'll all be funneled in there to chat and mingle in between sessions. So as I said, the timeline, we're going to do the 30-minute presentation now, then 15 minutes for QA, and then we will go into the networking break. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Kristen and Aaron here with Robots versus Risk, how AI is rewriting the TMF Oversight Rulebook. Guys, the stage is yours, and good luck. Have fun.
Ooh, this is fun. All right. How do I advance the slide? Do I just click forward? There we go.
Oh.
Perfect. All right. So hi, everybody. I'm Kristen Hunter, and this is Aaron Grant. Aaron, I was going to put your LinkedIn picture on here, but I think you're like 12 in your LinkedIn picture. Like it's from forever ago. So I think
it's from a conference where I was talking from the side or something like that. I'm not worried about my face in the future,
Yeah, he definitely looks pre-kids. But you said you're passionate about delivering practical, usable solutions. So I wrote, I'm passionate about creating experiences that matter. So between the two of us, we're going to make this a really great session. We definitely want this to be interactive. I know we have time at the end reserved for questions, but put your questions in there throughout. So we have lots building up and we'll try and get to them. And this is more like a fireside chat, but we're kind of going to go into some really interesting topics here. So first, that was supposed to have animation. I'll wait for that then. So Aaron, talk to me about why are we even talking about AI now? Before we get into just AI and TMF oversight, like why now? What's changing?
Yeah, so I think you have a couple different themes going on right now. You have the standard themes that we have, which is like, our lives are always becoming more complex, like in the TMF space. We're being asked to do more with less. I think that's always a universal construct within, clinical operations. But you also have this, big change going on in the world, but it's starting to affect what we do now. Like everybody's talking about AI. Everybody's trying to push into AI. There's lots of experimentation going on, I think, around clinical trials and data collection and things like that, but it's going to start flowing into what we do. And you have a couple of other themes going on. I mean, the FDA, it seems like every week they're releasing another kind of like bit of opinion or guidance or something like that on AI, from the Elsa chatbot that they're going to start using internally to do reviews, which has everybody very interested and spooked at the same time. Their credibility assessment framework, the opinion paper they just published the other day on using AIs, in clinical trials and where they think it'll make a difference. So I think that all of those themes coming together of like that high complexity coming in with, those other themes, like, it's going to start affecting what we do across the TMF spectrum. But for this conversation, we really wanted to talk about oversight because it seems like that's like a theme that keeps coming up of how do we do oversight the right way, and how can these tools help? What are some things we need to look out for? And, what are the changes that we might be expecting in our jobs?
Awesome. We kind of talked through some of that here.
Yeah, and like the child's room. So like we just did a speech on this, or we did a panel on this in Geneva for CDISC. like a month ago, and none of that FDA stuff was even out there yet. But what we talked about in that panel group a lot was like the metaphor of like the TMF being kind of like your kid's bedroom. And like, is it messy? Is it not? Is it straightened up? But like, whatever, did they just sweep stuff under the carpet? And so like, it's a nice way to kind of talk as we go through this, about different ways that AIs and robots and machine learning and things like that might be affecting things.
Got it. So we really are at a crossing point now.
Yeah.
What kind of used to work isn't going to work anymore, and everything's changing.
I think we're going to be pushed, to do things differently. But, like, I don't want to see that as like, people pushing things in on you. I want to see that as, for me, I see that as a huge opportunity for all of us, in doing, maybe being able to get to the things that have always annoyed us, try to make them better.
Right. All right, we're going to take this child's room, we're going to kind of take it to the extreme. We're not going to take it too far where it doesn't make sense, but it really helped me understand this and visualize it, and that the impact we're going to have. All right, great. So we have a polling question now for everyone. So we're going to go to our first poll. So how comfortable are you personally with understanding and applying AI in TMF oversight? And I think there's a poll tab that just appeared over on your right-hand side. So in that little chat area, it should say poll. But let's talk about this as they're completing the poll. We're talking about AI, and now we're talking about AI and TMF oversight. Now, I know pharma moves at a very glacial pace, is afraid of change, just doesn't want to move very fast. So we usually wait. But I mean, talk to me about like how it's important that we're comfortable with this, right? Most of the time in pharma, if there's something new, everybody waits and sees who adopts it first and who does it and how did it work. And then maybe several years later, the industry kind of moves forward. But how do you envision this playing out?
Yeah, I mean, I think first off, it's tough to stay on top of all this stuff. So like I joined just in time. My job is to stay on top of all this stuff for just in time. And I find it even hard to keep up with the rate and the amount of announcements that are going on all the time. It's overwhelming. And I have like my day job of things to do. So it's tough to even keep up and keep track of it. Let alone have time to start playing around with it and really start to understand it in a way that you can start to apply it. I also think, we are absolutely cautiously curious as an industry, right? Because we don't want to deal with EMA or FDA walking in the door and asking questions that all of a sudden we don't feel comfortable answering. So it seems like it, is the kind of thing where who's going to take that first step? Who's going to go and like, kind of put their neck out there to see if they can get away with some of these things. But I think at some point it's going to be like a tidal wave coming over us. We're going to have to take advantage of it, and we're going to be pushed by our organizations to take advantage of some of these technologies.
So cautiously curious is the winner.
I like that we ended up with like kind of a bell curve there of how everybody is, and
cautiously curious seems smart. So let's talk now about framing the change. So talk to me about what's actually changing in oversight. So if we're looking at this room analogy, now that we can see the whole room, how is oversight of that room changing?
Yeah. So like, if you think about the normal like sponsor, CRO, stakeholder engagement, right? You have this room that's, you're collecting all of your records in. That room may look tidy. It may look really messy. A lot of times nowadays, like we're having arguments around, is the room actually messy or not? You're kind of having that like normal conversation you have with your kids of like, yeah, it's fine. And you're like, no, it's not. There's socks all over the place. You need to clean those things up. And, for us, we tried to break it down in like a couple different shifts that are happening. Risk continues to be a big topic in AI. Or sorry, in TMF and operations there. I think there's a shift though in how we think about risk, and we can talk about that a little bit more. But if some of these tools help us get a more clear overview of the entirety of the scope, what does risk have to do with that? Like, how do we play that in, and how do we change some of those conversations? A lot of people have these questions, and this boils over into the rest of society as well. Like, do these tools, are they going to get rid of my job? How does my job change? What's the human's role, in this whole process when there's a lot of automation going on? Looking at TMF as a narrative and not a checklist, like this is a big thing that we talk about a lot at Just in Time. But like when you're thinking about your TMF, I think a lot of traditional TMF people are thinking about like, do I have all the records that I'm supposed to? And sometimes we get so caught up in that we don't even have time to like really look at like, are those records telling the story that we want the TMF to tell, or not the right story, and what do we do about that? So how does that change, as we have these different tools? And then finally, as we've been talking about before, what are the regulators going to start using with TMF and AI and other pieces? Like if there's a AI agent that's an inspector, like how does that change what they're looking at? How does that change the scope of what they're looking at? And how do we, kind of adapt to that as well?
Okay. So, all right. So should we carry the room analogy through kind of all of this?
Go for it.
Let's start with,
yeah.
All right. So we're going to kind of dig into these 4 areas a little deeper and really kind of go through what they mean. Why don't we go ahead and pull the slides? So it'll just be Aaron and I, because we're going to kind of talk through this. So the first category, risk, visibility, and prioritization. So if we can see everything, so we can see into the room, right? So, or we can see everything in the TMF. How do we know which mess is important, which is most important? So how does risk-based oversight, what does that really mean now that we can see the whole room?
Yeah. So let's like set it up practically for everybody, right? Like there's potentially tools that are coming out in the next couple of years that are going to allow us to potentially QC every single record that comes into the system, do reviews on every single record that comes into the system, whether that happens maybe on your stakeholder side, maybe you as the sponsor have tools to do that. But, if we're using that room analogy, what does it mean is, before you could kind of sweep things under the rug, so to speak, and there was like, searchlights looking for kind of like bigger things, but potentially we may have the ability in the next couple years to really see every single thing that's wrong in the room. It's almost like somebody with OCD or something, like, oh, that table lamp needs to be rotated a little bit there.
Like the white glove on the mantle to see if there's any dust on there.
Right. What I think that does is like traditionally, I think we talk about like risk-based reviews and things like that of the TMF as a way to like save money and time, because we don't have enough time and frankly budgets to go look at everything. So if AI allows us to go look at everything, like what does risk become? What does a risk-based review become? And I think where it's going, it was always about this, but like it's going to be more pronounced, a shift towards like when we talk about risk, we're really talking less about being like more efficient, and we're talking more about like prioritization, right? Like if there's 1,000 things that we find long, there's going to be a long tail of just stuff that probably doesn't matter that much. And so like, leveraging some of these tools, and also for yourselves, you need to start thinking about like, what are the most important things that we need to get right here? Like, what are the stories that are going on in the TMF to get right? Like if we have a list of 1,000 things, what's the right way to prioritize that? And that's going to have to start getting into like maybe understanding our trials better, which we do, and understanding like what are those key documents? What are the key areas that we want to make sure those stories are being told the right way?
Got it. So if AI lets us see that whole room, we still have to decide what's clutter, what's a mess, what's potentially a health hazard.
What are we going to let go? Right. Like
Exactly.
it's not worth fighting about that sock on the ground.
Exactly.
And we're going to stay
Exactly.
focused on, like that it's actually cleanly, like it's not going to get you sick or something like that. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. And then AI can help us kind of surface trends, right? Notice things across. So, for example, if there's some portion of the room that is always messy, maybe we look into why as opposed to just cleaning it every single time, right? Dig a little deeper into the reasoning.
Absolutely. And I think that, kind of gets into some of that, like, what's my role as a human? Like, you can
Yeah.
absolutely use tools to help you start to identify those trends. But I think, like, at least right now, where I think we're going to see the tools lagging compared to what humans can do, and especially those, people with just years and years of experience, is like, okay, we can see everything wrong. But how do we then start getting deep into like, why is this happening? So it's less about like trying to figure out like, and having like, you can think of the traditional sponsor CRO relationship being like, hey, we just did our quarterly review and these are the 100 things that we saw wrong, and ideally moving that conversation more to like, okay, we can see everything that's wrong all the time, we can get that in there, but like, how do we start having conversations now about like, why did it get messy to begin with? Like, where did the problems come? Why do we keep having this same problem all the time? Like, why aren't you throwing out the pizza boxes and just letting them go up? Let's talk about like when you're eating the pizza, what's going on, to get in there. Or, when you're going to your monitoring visits, why do you keep having trouble collecting site personnel documents or something like that? Why are ICFs
Right.
like constantly lagging behind? Instead of just beating somebody over the head that they're missing, having a bigger conversation about maybe what's the process problem we have here that we can look into. I think for those of us that work in this every day, it's a huge opportunity because it takes, potentially you're elevating kind of your role on the study team up a little bit, like where you're pointing out, you're not just kind of like at the end of the meeting going like, oh yeah, and we've got a bunch of documents missing too, but potentially you're the canary, so to speak, of like, helping start to lead your organization through where you see problems coming in, which I think is a huge opportunity for records management teams and things like that. TMF is traditionally such a lagging business indicator, right? We have all these metrics we collect for no reason, or we think for reasons, but then, we don't really know what to do with them. As these things start happening more in real time, instead of like, a monitoring visit happen and we need to collect the documents 2 weeks later, as this stuff starts to be coming in more real time, we can be doing evaluations on that stuff and seeing the problems and the
Right.
trends and be really adding a lot of value to the study team from that perspective.
So that's really how that human oversight role is going to evolve, right? We can use, if we're sticking with the room analogy, we can use AI to kind of clean and sort and tell us when there's a mess, but it's not going to tell us why we keep having that mess.
Right.
So the kind of human role becomes more of a, instead of just checking all those boxes and making sure everything is, the things that are important are where they need to be, it's about kind of recognizing patterns and how we're going to intervene and how we're going to fix this and kind of coaching. So it's really inserting those critical thinking skills.
Yeah, it absolutely is. Like you were talking the other day about monitoring visit reports and um how you could start to read through and like see these stories start to emerge. As I said before, I think we get so caught up in like completeness reviews and timeliness reviews and quality reviews that are very focused a lot of times on just the individual records, right? Like it's almost like you want to have, hopefully this isn't too gets anyone in trouble or anything like that. But like I sometimes feel like in the TMF industry, we don't care if the inspection's bad sometimes, as long as it doesn't look like, we're missing a record or something like that. Like as long as it doesn't, as long as the inspection, the findings don't say there were missing records, we're fine if the record said something, bad about the trial that we didn't know about. And I think there's a pressure on all of us to start thinking about the TMF more from a GCP perspective. And what are these records saying about our trial? What is it saying about us as a clinical operations team about how we had oversight over this trial? And when I say clinical operations team, not just us as sponsors or us as CROs or really everybody being involved and working together to elevate this conversation away from it just being like, this looks green and this looks green and we have all these check boxes over here, but really like, what do those visit reports say? What is, whatever. Did a visit report mention that there was like an offsite, location where the drug was being administered that nobody picked up on?
Right.
Those are the kind of things that I think are opportunities for us to start, as I talk about like, having more impact on our trial teams.
So let's go back
just an analogy there, but yeah, keep going.
Well, I was going to bring it back to the room analogy. I'll bring you back.
Good.
So if we have our room, right, as our TMF, our CRO, let's say, is our house cleaner, right? The CRO is cleaning our room.
Right.
So our CRO is now using automation, some sort of tool, maybe a robot cleaner or something. So if my CRO is now using AI, what kinds of things do I need to ask as a trial sponsor? Like, how does this change the game for me and my oversight?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think the traditional sponsor CRO relationship is very transactional and like, not everybody, and absolutely I've seen wonderful examples contrary to this, but a lot of times it's like, the sponsor goes in, does like a subset of the work that the CRO is supposed to do anyways, and comes and kind of yells at them and says like, we just looked at this and everything's a mess. And the CRO goes like, oh yeah, sorry about that. We'll go clean it up. Or, I don't think that's, you might be looking at it wrong. And there's kind of this back and forth, but it's very adversarial. A lot of the times, I think to use the room analogy, like instead of arguing over whether the room is dirty or not and how clean it should be, I think we now have the ability to see, like everybody can see at any time potentially, if we're using AI-based QC, QR reviews, things like that, we know how messy the room is all the time. And I think it changes that conversation and that relationship. It's going to be much more about like how we trust each other, how we work together to fix changes, how we kind of like change the role, like how do, in giving oversight, if I'm the sponsor, how do I add value and look at this from a different perspective than what the CRO is doing?
Sure.
It creates challenges too, though. I mean, like if the CRO starts using automated tools, to your point, Kristen, what do I need to do as a sponsor to understand those tools? And like, what's my oversight job and even understanding how they work? Or like, what am I supposed to be checking there? That's an open question that we're going to have to start solving. But it's only going to get solved by us having open conversations with each other. The kind of old adage of that housekeeper sweeping the dirt under the rug and hoping that the homeowner doesn't see it. Like, I don't think that's going to work anymore. I think it's more, you're going to have to be cleaning the room together as a team.
Right. And if your CRO is using AI, we have to ask questions like, what logic is your AI following, right? Are we solving the right problems, or are we still just sweeping it under the rug in a fancier way? And these are things that we've never even had to think about before.
Right. It's new stuff, and that can be daunting to us, but I think it's going to end up with like so much opportunity for us to have like so much better deliverables, TMFs. The room will be so much nicer to be in, and to be in there. I think like we talked also about, sometimes the room might look clean, but the sheets might be dirty, and you can't really see that looking in there, or like moving the conversation away from like, is the room clean, to like, is the room pleasing? Like, does it have the right order and structure in it? Why is that stuff over there? Why is there a freezer sitting in the corner of my kid's bedroom, or refrigerator?
It's clean, but it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, like how do we get to those conversations sooner? I think that's the big opportunity for us.
I agree. Now, we talked a little bit about this already, the TMF, being more of a narrative and telling a story and not as much of a checklist, right? Like you said, the bed may be made, but the sheets may be dirty, and we don't know that. But now we can dig a little deeper, but understand why. Why are there dirty sheets on this bed?
Right. Theoretically, we'll have more time for those conversations too. Like as we talked about even before, just keeping up on AI, like we have no time in our jobs because we're so busy going through all these things. I'm really hopeful that some of these tools can free us up to have the more interesting conversations about where things go, which then just leads to better practices, keeps the room from getting dirty to begin with, instead of just constantly be like, hiring the cleaner every week to clean it up.
Understood. All right, let's go to our second and final polling question while we kind of tackle that last category of regulatory and governance impact. So the second polling question is kind of, what's your biggest challenge in TMF oversight today? Knowing which risks to prioritize, limited visibility across studies or sites, too much manual review, not enough insight, aligning with CRO tools and processes, or getting buy-in for new oversight approaches. So we'll let that sit for a bit, but let's talk about, how does this work with inspection readiness, right? So I know, we have a lot of tools, but what happens when the inspector shows up with their own AI bot and says, okay, I'm ready to look at your TMF?
That question, it's been posed for the last 12 months. And I think every time it gets brought up, like in a room with real people in it, and not virtually, like we're all sitting at home right now, there's almost a collective groan in the room as people realize that it's not just my own organization and my own stuff that we got to worry about. What happens when the inspectors show up and can see the dirt under the rug and things like that. That is, a really interesting question that is changing so quickly too. But we're going to have to figure that out as we go and start to see what they do. I think some of us are hopeful this is a lot of noise, and maybe, it'll be a number of years between. If we think we're risk averse as an industry, sometimes the regulators are even more risk averse to adopting these technologies. So maybe it'll just be, 5 or 6 years till we have to worry about it, but it might not. Knowing to prioritize. So prioritization continues to be,
too much manual review, not enough insight.
Right. And I think this ties into not just even themes of AI. Right. We've talked about probably at different sessions within TMF week already, V4 coming out, we're really looking to move the reference model and how we file TMF documents more towards, we're going to change the name of documents to records. We're trying to build a more digital world in how we do this TMF, which is a lot of opportunity to, maybe get rid of some of these manual reviews as we move things to data. The digital data flow initiative from CDISC as well is pushing us more. And these themes keep coming up that we're, as much as we still love our individual PDF documents and things like that, things are changing now, and starting to flow. And we're going to have more systems, we're going to have more integrations, we're going to have more pieces, and there's going to be better tools to keep track of all that. And how does that all interact?
Right. And then if we move on from that to go back to the regulatory and governance impact, if the landlord or the regulator is coming in and they're just not checking a checklist, they're scanning the whole room, we have to be able to explain to them the logic of the room.
And the big fear is going to be, right, if they come in with an AI inspector agent, can that agent quickly see everything that's wrong there? And how does that change the conversation with them? Are they expecting everything to be perfect there? Are they expecting you to have knowledge around all that? So we talk about your companies might be pushing you to have more things right, and prioritizing things the right way. But we don't know 100% how the inspectors are going to come in and what they're going to expect. Are they going to expect perfection coming in the door? And so does that put even more pressure on us to get things together? Or are they going to take a similar approach to prioritization and bringing things in? Or are those agents going to read every one of your plans right off the bat, and then go through and, within a matter of an hour, spit out a whole list of questions that they're going to start asking you about.
Right.
It might be uncomfortable. So it probably, at minimum, if I'm making bold predictions, I think it's going to put more pressure on us once again to have those stories more tight and have, more oversight than we've had up to this point. Because if, I would imagine they're going to come to the conclusion, if we're able to have this level of oversight with our tools, they're going to expect the sponsors and the CROs and other stakeholders to also have that oversight too. So I think it's going to raise the bar in what they expect to see in an inspection as well.
Yeah, and we have to be able to explain it, right? The more automation we use, the more thoughtful we have to have about governance. If we're going to use that room analogy, like, who told the housekeeper what to clean? That's what they're going to ask, right? And we need to be prepared to ask that if it isn't clean enough, or they found a mess under the bed, or the sheets are dirty.
Yeah.
So we're doing some things at Just in Time GCP around developing some AI tools. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I mean, as a lot of people are, we're starting to experiment. In fact, I came into Just in Time about a year ago to lead some efforts in looking at some of these tools. How can we start taking those first baby steps into oversight and review and other pieces to start laying that foundation, and take away some of that manual work that people were looking at before. So we're absolutely looking in there. We always are passionate as a company about trying to elevate that conversation up to what's your TMF saying versus, just like a checklist of like, are all the documents in there and whatnot. So we're going to continue on that journey. And I think we're all going to be on it together as we start to bring it in. And we want to see, just like Montreal as well, be helping everybody down that journey, because everyone's once again busy. How, what's our role in helping to, take some of these things off your plate and be that trusted partner to help move things forward.
Absolutely. So I see we do have some kind of questions coming in the chat. Go ahead, Danny. Let's tackle some of these questions, and then we can circle back.
I've been listening to this with bated breath, and I've seen some questions popping up in the chat that I absolutely want to get addressed because they're just so interesting. Like Ann Ackley asked this question, which I absolutely love. AI can be a bit of a black box situation. What does validation look like when it seems that only the results can be evaluated and not the mechanisms on which the AI got to those results or came to those results and answers?
Yeah, this is a great question, and it comes up a lot. And I think we're actually starting to get some answers around it too, which is good. And I'll add on to this question. Not only can you not look at how sometimes the results happen, but running it through something the same time twice might give you different results. And how do you deal with it in a validated environment? It breaks the QA team's brain sometimes. I think. So I can give you my personal opinion, and then I'll point everybody to like where you can get some guidance from the industry as well. So personally, I think especially with machine learning is a little bit different, but with these new like LLMs, to use the shortcut term like ChatGPT style algorithms and things like that, you have you kind of have to start thinking about these things and how you use them more like people than you do treat them as computers, right? Like when we validate computers, computers traditionally, you give it A and you get B out the other side every single time, and you can validate that and check that off. When you have a person, you can't just give them A and get B out the side every single time, as much as we want people to be able to do that. And we try to, we train them, but I think the way that we will end up adopting these technologies is we're going to treat them more like people, in the sense of like, we've given them proper training. We have documented that training. We have proper processes wrapped around those people, right? So, you have a secondary level of checking that either a human's doing or maybe even another agent, as weird as that is to say, and you develop processes that try to, account for the fact that, there's variability in the answers. And we're seeing that starting to come from the regulators. So the FDA, it was earlier this year, I think it was maybe February or so. And, I can try to pull a link really quick and put it in. But the FDA released a paper where they were talking about these tools, and instead of validating, like talking about validation with AI tools, they talked about this notion of a credibility assessment. And it's something we've started to adopt internally, and they actually lay out a framework of like almost like an alternative to validation of like, how are you documenting, like what's the use of this agent, what's the context of use you're going to be using it in, what are you expecting it to do, and then like what have you done to validate that it's going to give you the right answers every time, and that it allows you to sort of document that entire process. And they're, go look up that credibility assessment paper that they released. I think it's not regulation yet, it's an opinion paper from the FDA, but I think it gives a really good perspective into what they're thinking about right now, about what they're expecting to see. And that's what we're working on, is we're developing some of these tools, kind of using that framework to have the conversation. Sorry if that was too long of an answer.
No, that I'm sitting here like floored, because it's so interesting to think like that really is, I feel like the whole mentality needs to change on how we look at it. Like you can't validate an AI the same way you validate a normal computer software. Right. It's like CSA is not going to apply to an AI tool. Like, you need to really like kind of, I think, unlearn some of your old practices. So it's really interesting.
But I think it's really
you see people.
It's super hard. But I think when you use the person analogy, to me, that like total, because it seems like insurmountable at the beginning. And then when you start thinking about it, it's like, oh, wait a second, we've been dealing with this problem since before we even had, like when we were still in paper processes. We just didn't call it a computer, right? Like it was the people that were doing the exact same problem you have with these. So like even just that little mind shift, if you can keep that in the back of your mind, it may help you in thinking about like common ways and common answers to how we deal with some of this, and get you off of that like writer's block you might have.
For sure. So here we got a next one from Ronla Prince. Identifying problems is great for AI, but how do we see it helping to prevent them? Do you see any AI tools focusing on prevention? For example, filing documents in the right place in an eTMF from the beginning? What other TMF areas is AI being used to prevent issues?
Yeah, and we made this talk about oversight, and we've like skipped over all of like one of the key tenets to like a lot of it, which is like getting it right the first time saves a lot of energy and time, at the end of it, right? Absolutely. I think there's a lot of tools that are starting to come out. And this is actually where I think as an industry, we're a little bit more mature. There's a lot of systems and vendors that are coming out right now to varying degrees of success, and we're getting better. But like traditional machine learning technologies have been applied pretty well, or at least are starting to get relatively mature about like the filing problem, right? Everyone's dream is to have like a trash bag of TMF documents that they just dump into a machine and they just come out the other side like perfectly organized with all their metadata and everything else. But I think we're seeing a lot of that come in, into systems right now, and providers that are doing things like helping in real time when you're uploading documents, making suggestions, not just the document type, but helping to like, understand our complex rules around dating conventions, and other pieces like that, start to actually identify misfiles to the original people that are putting it in. I mean, to me, I'm really, and Ronla, I don't know where you are, what system you're using or whatever, but, like, I always want to give that information not to the QC person or somebody downstream, like as like people who work in here, we're always dealing with people putting documents in the wrong way to start. And there's lots of reasons for that, but like helping them do it right better for them and help educating them and using the technology there, I think is like, really going to help our jobs later, because they're going to have so much cleaner of a room to start with, right?
Absolutely.
Perfect. Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think I'm gonna have one more question pull up for you guys, because I know you have one more slide for your closing thoughts. So we'll go here. And this kind of, I think, is like a follow-up to what you were answering before. But as AI becomes more involved in TMF documentation and classification, risk flagging, how do we mitigate the risk bias or false confidence in automated outputs?
So what's awesome about this is it's sort of like a combination of the previous two questions.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right? Because absolutely AI is going to get more involved in document classification and risk. Like it's just going to happen. Providers are putting it out there, and you should be pushing them to do this. But like, how do we develop new tools? I think is like going to be really important to like how we have a conversation about where we go here. I think at a minimum, take that first answer I gave there, which is just because you're having AI do a lot of this classification work or whatever, it doesn't remove your right or your need for oversight over that, right? Like whether it's a different, like just like now we have people upload documents and then maybe somebody QCs them and maybe somebody QCs the QCers, which may be too much and there's better ways to do it. But those mechanisms get developed to make sure that we're doing proper oversight, to make sure that things are working the right way. And a lot of the other piece I'll say for more of like for the technologists in the room, just because you come up with a model that's doing things the right way doesn't mean it keeps doing things the right way. Like to me, I always look for good feedback loops that get automatically built into the system, whereas like things get corrected that then feeds back into the model to continually make it better. It's like we can keep having like checking on checking on checking on checking, but I think also what's really important, and there's a huge opportunity, is like have those checks like automatically retrain as it goes through, like will increase the quality practically in a way that like will allow us to reduce that checking overall. And so I always look for those feedback loops, like even if you're not a technologist and you're evaluating some of these tools, ask those questions about like, okay, like how do you keep this thing up to date? How do you bring things in? Another thing I think vendors can do as well is, or as an industry, and this is an open question, but a pet project of mine is, for the top 10 pharmas in the world, they have so much data that they can train their models and take advantage of these things and get these things working the right way. But there's so many companies out there that just are running one trial or 3 trials or whatever, don't have the amount of data. I think you can leverage vendors that can like start to aggregate some of these models together. There's potentially opportunity in the industry for us to start sharing in some way, like larger amounts of data. I think CDISC might be able to help us with this as well. So like we can create places where there's enough data, but everybody gets to take advantage of it. It's a little squishy because everybody's a little worried about sharing data right now. But like if we can get over that, I hope this isn't too John Lennon, but if we can get over that, I think there's like a huge opportunity for us, to be able to transform our industry for the better and take away a lot of this manual work that we all have to do.
I think that positions us nicely for our last slide.
Yeah,
pull that up. Conclude with that. So for our closing, why is the room messy? Let's really talk about the why. Oversight is about trust, transparency, and shared accountability. I love that you talk about that, Aaron. Like there's so much opportunity for the industry to work together in this kind of monumental crossroads where we are, where all this new technology is being adopted. And like you said, sharing of the data. If we use the tools right, we don't just catch mistakes, we build systems that prevent them.
And that's when we're doing it right? Like that's what all of the questions were about in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and then let's raise the standard together, right? We talked about that. So, just in conclusion, if AI shows us everything that went wrong, how do we turn that into improvement and not just finger pointing, right?
Yeah. And the funny thing about it all is like, it comes back to like, as much as this has taken the people out of it, I think it puts even more pressure on us as people to develop those tighter relationships with the people on the other side of the fence of who we're dealing with, the inspectors, our stakeholders, CROs, sites, like those relationships become important about how we solve these problems and how we work together. So you don't just end up generating timeliness metrics that are yellow that nobody knows how to get better, but like actually are working towards making things right from the beginning.
Yeah, and there's a huge learning opportunity too. People talk about, being afraid that AI is going to take their job. Well, AI is not going to take your job, but the person who knows how to use AI is going to take your job.
Take your job.
So you need to figure this out. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for people to, educate themselves on this new technology and just learn, and then, be a champion at your company for this. Like, you can't wait. All your competitors are moving forward.
Be the canary, as Aaron said.
Yeah. Sorry, Danny, go for it.
No, I was just going to say we have 35 seconds left and it's going to cut us off at the end. I know you guys, this is great stuff that's going on. I just want to make sure you guys don't get cut off. So everyone, thank you again for joining this session today. Kristen, Aaron, this was an absolute pleasure to watch and be involved in. This is such an interesting hot topic right now that I'm just excited to see, all the knowledge that has been kind of given. I'm going to go look up that credibility kind of validation right now.
You know what? I'll grab it and I'll put it in the group, whatever.
The lobby.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Kim. This was great.
Perfect. So we can jump backstage now.